Hello, and welcome to the latest installment of Legal Bites, the official podcast of Cummings and Cummings Law, where we focus on helping businesses and their owners re-domesticate out of volatile legal and tax environments to more predictable pro-entrepreneurship, pro-growth jurisdictions. Many of my clients generally, and many of my re-domestication clients specifically, are consultants. There is regrettably so much confusion when it comes to moving your consulting business to a new state, attributable in large part to conflicting, false, and incomplete information on Reddit and AI. I will set the record straight as I have completed hundreds of redomestications for consultants, so I do speak with some authority, at least on this particular matter. I will then conclude by explaining how consultants can use the same laws as other businesses to their advantage to relocate their existing LLC or corporation out of their prior state to a new state the right way, while keeping their existing federal employer identification number, contracts, bank accounts, and credit history intact. But first, a brief introduction. My name is Chad Daniel Cummings, and I am an attorney and a certified public accountant serving clients in matters of business, tax, and commercial law. I am Chief Executive Officer of the multi-state, multi-attorney law firm Cummings and Cummings Law. And in addition to my day job, I also teach business and tax law at the university level. I hold 4 degrees, including 2 law degrees, as well as a bachelor's degree in accounting and a master's degree in federal income taxation, in addition to 12 professional licenses and certifications covering accounting, tax, audit, financial planning, and of course, the law. My firm website is www.cummings.law. Consulting practices, and particularly solo consulting practices, are among the easiest businesses to relocate and among the most likely to be left behind in the prior state. That is a problem. But we'll get to that in a minute. A consulting firm has no factory, no warehouse, and no storefront. Its assets are a laptop, a methodology, and a book of business. Very little about the work of consulting depends on the state named on the certificate of formation, and yet many consultants continue to file annual reports and pay annual fees and subject themselves to jurisdiction in a state they may have departed years ago. Those payments are not trivial, and neither is the matter of jurisdiction. For example, California imposes a minimum franchise tax of $800 per year on a limited liability company that earned no revenue at all, and adds a gross receipts fee once revenue passes certain thresholds. New York similarly requires newly formed limited liability companies to publish notice in 2 newspapers, an expense that exceeds $1,000 in some counties, followed by a filing fee every other year. Other states like Illinois and New Jersey both reach the income that passes through to the owner's personal return, even if they no longer live in that state. A consultant who no longer lives or works in those states receives nothing in exchange for those payments and that liability. Meanwhile, states like Florida and Texas impose no personal income tax, and that fact carries more weight for a consultant than for most other business owners. A consulting practice is often a single member limited liability company or a single shareholder subchapter S corporation, which means that the profit arrives on the owner's personal income tax return as so-called flow-through or pass-through income without an intermediate structure absorbing it first. There is no separation between the performance of the business itself and the tax position of the person who runs it. According to Tax Foundation data, the average business that relocates to a state without income tax retains more than $12,500 per year, and in some cases, quite a bit more than that. Now, tax is one consideration, but certainly not the only dimension. Consultants sell their time and advice can be blamed for outcomes that disappoint. Florida and Texas both maintain strong asset protection statutes and well developed bodies of business law favoring consultants, which means the rules governing the entity are settled and familiar to the courts that would apply them. The same cannot be said of every state. Predictability has real dollar value when the product is the judgment. Two practical matters are worth exploring in greater depth. First, redomestication changes the home state of the entity rather than creating a new one. So the federal employer identification number remains the same, and existing engagement letters, MSAs, banking relationships, and professional liability insurance coverage continue without interruption. Nothing requires reassignment or renegotiation. Separately, point two, physical presence in the destination state is actually not required of the owners. Every state requires a registered agent with a street address within its borders, and a commercial registered agent service can satisfy that requirement. That is to say, if you are a digital nomad operating a consultancy practice, you need not necessarily be in Florida or Texas to redomesticate your company there. What a redomestication does not change on its own, however, is the owner's personal tax position. That depends on where the owner actually resides, where the work is performed, and importantly, where the clients are located. Those questions properly belong with your CPA, and they should be answered before any filing is made. Having said that, redomestication is often a tax-saving maneuver, as I will explain momentarily. Now, with this context in mind, redomestication is the lesser known legal process of transferring an existing company's state of domicile to a new state without dissolving it, without creating a new entity, and without triggering federal income tax consequences, but only when performed with the strict formalities required by the Federal Internal Revenue Code, applicable Treasury regulations, and the voluminous statutory frameworks of both the destination and departing states. When performed by a competent professional, the company will retain its existing federal employer identification number, contracts, credit history, track record, and bank accounts. That is to say, there is zero operational or financial disruption, but only if you get it right the first time. That is why it is so important to work with a credentialed professional and save the DIY for home improvement. I have successfully completed redomestications from all 50 states. Yes, that includes California. Yes, that includes New York. And for limited liability companies, partnerships, subchapter S corporations, and subchapter C corporations. So if someone is telling you it cannot be done, what they are really telling you is they do not know how to do it. Now, foreign entity registration is not the same thing as redomestication. Do not allow yourself to become confused by terminology or conflicting advice. Let's be clear. Foreign entity registration, also referred to as foreign qualification among myriad other confusing and sometimes misleading terms, does not, repeat, does not change the company's legal domicile. In fact, it actually does the opposite by keeping the legal entity in that former state indefinitely and merely adding another layer of compliance and tax obligations in the destination jurisdiction, thereby leaving you anchored to that state you thought you were leaving. Meanwhile, a traditional merger, which is still not the same thing as redomestication, creates a new distinct entity in the destination state, may and often does require the issuance of a new federal employer identification number, and can trigger serious tax consequences. Finally, dissolution. This is the big one. Dissolution should not enter the conversation at all because dissolution terminates the company. It is the legal equivalent of administering a lethal injection to your business. That is not hyperbole. Dissolution is a going out of business maneuver, not a relocation mechanism. Dissolution is often a taxable event, and when performed incorrectly, can expose the owners of the company, that's you, to unlimited personal, yes, you heard me correctly, personal, joint, and several liability for the company's liabilities, known and unknown. That means your house, your car, your bank accounts, maybe even your retirement accounts and little Jimmy's college fund could potentially be at risk. Yes, that's scary. And yes, that is reality. That is because the so called veil of liability protection no longer exists because the company no longer exists. Simple logic. If you think dissolution is a shrewd cost saving maneuver, you may be in for a rude awakening. And if you have a so called professional saying, oh, that's easy, just dissolve it, please seek better advice before you make a catastrophic mistake. Redomestication, when paired with the change of personal residency and that is an important and, a reduction or outright cessation of business operations in the former state, can reduce or even eliminate state tax exposure there for the entity and its owners. Don't take my word for it, ask your CPA. Now is the time to consider acting before the various state legislatures consider changes to their respective state laws to hinder or even eliminate the avenue of redomestication. If you have questions regarding potentially redomesticating your existing LLC or corporation, please use the link in the description or in the bio for more information on this process and to schedule time for you and I to speak one on one about your specific scenario. Again, my name is Chad Daniel Cummings of the firm Cummings and Cummings Law, and I hope that you found this information informative. As always, the information in this presentation is necessarily general in nature and is not legal or tax advice, nor should it be construed as such, because that advice definitionally must be specific to a particular set of facts and circumstances. Should you have any questions regarding this information or the content of any of my many earlier presentations on these topics, please visit my firm website at www.cummings.law, not .com, but .law, to schedule time for a consultation. I look forward to that opportunity to speak and perhaps even work with you very soon.